Good morning. It's Richard Edelman from New York. I'm joined by Courtney Miller in Chicago and Jackie Cooper in London. Today, we're here to discuss the results of the Edelman Trust Barometer special report on brand trust from we to me. So we are just out of the field, 15 nations, 15,000 respondents across the entire geographic span of the world. What we wanted to understand is how people understand brands. So let's try to look at 5 years of upheaval, specifically COVID, which caused isolation, caused decline of trust in the experts. Also, it saw that business became the most trusted institution in the world. Inflation, $18 for a pizza in New York yesterday. The cost of living has cramped people's lifestyles, but in fact, we'll see that among some, in fact, it even causes people not to be able to have 3 meals a day. Geopolitics, the conflicts in Ukraine, Russia, Israel, Gaza, the conflict between the US and China, where a company locates matters because we see a rise of domestic brands. Nationalism, we've had 50 elections in the last 12 months. We see that, in fact, domestic brands are thriving, coincident with a rise in nationalism. Finally, AI. People are deeply scared about the job impact of AI. They don't really understand the benefits, that's sure. Now, the new role for brands is make my world stable again. I just want peace of mind. I've been shaken so much, I feel like an astronaut. Financial distress is the new norm for people who are under 45 years old. In fact, I'm paying my bills late. My credit cards are maxed. In fact, I'm having to skip meals. I can't even afford health care. Lastly, I can't afford to buy a house. This is exactly inverse based on age. So the older you are, the less financial hardship. Interesting. Also, you see people appreciate that trade wars are going to increase the cost of living. Why? Well, Nike last week announced that it had to hike prices for the back to school shopping period because their cost of goods is going to be higher. So 3/4 of people appreciate that, in fact, tariffs are going to raise prices. Now, this is deeply important. We see a massive trust advantage for domestically produced brands, especially in Western democracies. So, for example, in Germany, it's a 30-point delta between a product made in Germany and a foreign brand. And this is consistent across the US, Japan, France, etc. It's much less so in developing markets, though I will say that in cosmetics, for example, there are 100 new cosmetics brands in China since COVID, all of which are sold in e-commerce and are a serious threat to the foreign brands. What is it that I look to brands to do? Yes, it's price and quality, but I also am looking for brands to stabilize my world, calm me down, make me feel good, safe, confident, happy, give me a sense of can do, that I get out of bed in the morning and my brand is my partner in a better future. Also, help me do good and provide a way for me with the community. This is especially important if you're a foreign brand operating in a market. Courtney, to you.
Thanks, Richard. So obviously, we're living through these very turbulent times, and people today are looking for anchors, something they can count on emotionally and practically. And brands truly have become that anchor. They aren't just providers of products, but providers of reassurance, reliability, emotional safety. And in this particular moment in time that feels super chaotic, brands are stepping into that role that transcends category and filling the trust void left vacant by the very institutions that promise to protect us. Next slide. So as we think about the void that those brands are filling, it really it becomes a trust advantage gained over many of the institutions that touch people's lives every single day. People trust the brands they use as much or even more than their employer, and far more than traditional institutions like government, media, or even NGOs. And while institutions have really struggled to connect, brands have shown up consistently, tangibly, and that consistency has really created a different kind of bond, one that is rooted in not just performance, but presence. Next slide. And this isn't a small shift. In fact, we really see it as a seismic one. Since 2022, trust in societal institutions has stayed flat, stalled at neutral. Meanwhile, brand trust has been steady on a steady climb. And why? Why do we believe that's happening? Because brands have been visible, vocal, and empathetic. While institutions have really struggled to connect, brands have shown up consistently and tangibly. And that consistency has really created this very different kind of bond, as we mentioned before. Next slide. And while we see this trust advantage happening across all income levels, the most powerful proof of this is among low-income groups. Institutions are distrusted, but brands have really managed to climb out of that gap, earning trust where it's hardest to gain. And when you're living close to the edge, trust isn't given lightly, which makes this rise not just impressive, but incredibly meaningful. Next slide. And this makes trust something more than an emotional bond. It's a buying decision. And when asked what drives purchase, people rank "I trust it" right alongside value and quality. And that should be a big wake-up call for marketers. Marketers are used to optimizing for price and promoting product benefits. Those have always been strategic inputs, but trust, it's often treated as an outcome, not the input. And this data really flips the script on that. Trust isn't just a nice to have, it's a competitive advantage. It's the reason someone picks your brand off the shelf or clicks buy now. And it's not just about the brand itself, it extends all the way to the company behind it. So Jackie, over to you.
Thanks so much. And so let's look at this, that we're on this slide. Closer brand relationships bring greater responsibility, a take on a famous quote. It really sees that trust isn't just a competitive advantage. It is actually this responsibility, because today brands aren't just competing with the products to the left and right of them on the shelf. They're actually competing within culture itself, with the headlines, with the movements, with the emotional undercurrent of society. And that means trust is earned not just through what you sell, but through how you show up. Next slide. So over the last year, we've seen one headline that has been sort of recurring: purpose is dead, that consumers are kind of over it, that brands should just stick to selling. But this year, our data isn't showing a decline in the need for purpose as we once knew it, doing good in our world, but we are seeing an absolute evolution. We're seeing an evolution that puts the person at the center of the purpose evolution. Purpose isn't dead, therefore, it's actually evolving. You're not going to be hearing what people are really saying if you think that it's finished. You're going to be standing on the sidelines of being a commodity. So today it's more personal. It's not saving the universe, it's saving my world. 64% of people now say they choose brands based on their beliefs, which is 4 points up year over year. So this isn't a trend that's dying out, that's momentum. And 68% say it's extremely important that brands make them feel good, safe, calm, inspired, confident. These aren't fluffy feelings, they're emotional safety nets in a world that we know feels very unstable. So purpose isn't anymore about big statements. It's about small moments that feel deeply human, deeply personal, and it's about relevance, not righteousness. Next slide, please. So to earn trust, be in my world through culture. Trust has become one of the most valuable and vulnerable assets a brand can hold. And with 73% of people saying that they trust brands more when they reflect today's culture, the competitive set isn't just other brands in your category, it's actually culture itself. But culture moves really fast, and that speed creates both opportunity and risk. What makes a brand matter is how it shows up in that cultural moment, authentically, not performatively, as the majority of people, almost 3 in 4, say that how they play in culture is how they build trust. But as we know, trust is fragile because that same culture that builds it up can just as easily tear it down if a brand feels disconnected or disingenuous. So it's a complicated landscape for issues management, and there's no one-size-fits-all playbook. Today's cultural issues, whether it's climate to inequality to misinformation, are deeply personal, but they're also deeply fragmented. We see that clearly in the data. There's no consensus among issues. Political ideology is now overlapping with identity and belief drives purchase. On climate change, for example, there's a 16-point trust gap between left at 66% and right at 50%. On racial inequality, it's nearly 20 points. So this kind of polarization makes brand action pretty tricky. So you could say, well, I'll just do nothing. But if we go to the next slide, we can see that silence is not safety. 1 in 2 will assume the worst if brands are silenced. Not engaging is not an option because silence is actually a signal in its own right. So in today's climate, not saying anything can basically say everything. 51% say they'd less likely to buy from a brand that ignored its perceived obligation to take a stand on a societal issue. Consumers often assume the worst, that you don't care, that you're complicit, or that you're hiding something. Only a third of people will assume you're doing good and give you the benefit of the doubt if you don't talk about the good you're doing. And if we go to the next slide, we can see that the hard cost of silence is less purchase and less trust. It's not just about moral leadership, it's about business risk and emotional fallout. That's the hard cost of silence. This is particularly true, interestingly, among the older generations. Over half of those who are 45 plus say silence erodes both trust and intent to buy. And among those over 60, often seen as less values driven, that actually is a surprise because it's climbing to 60%. This is an insight we spent time understanding with our longevity lab and how to harness this age group for optimal commercial commitment. Courtney, over to you.
All right. Don't worry, it's not all bad news. There's some bright spots that we can really count on here because consumers are actually quite clear on what creates a brand's obligation to act. It's not about jumping on every issue. It's truly about alignment with your values, your action, your people, and your community. And these aren't abstract ideals. They're real criteria that define when and where a brand has earned the right and responsibility to engage. The obligation isn't to speak on everything, but to act where your brand has credibility, impact, and a track record. Next slide, please. And this is where things really crystallize. The more of these criteria that apply, the stronger the sense of obligation. When only one obligation criteria is met, just 37% feel a brand must act. But once that number really reaches 4 or more, the sense of obligation spikes to 71% or higher. The more criteria you hit, the expectation really becomes undeniable. And this gives brands a practical, data-driven framework for knowing when action isn't just expected, but demanded. Next slide, please. So we've seen the pressures on brands from rising expectations to the risk of inaction, but in truth, being an active brand is not just possible, it's the ultimate differentiator. In a landscape of sameness, activity is identity. And the question isn't if you should show up, but how you do it in a way that's right for your brand, your category, and your audience. Next slide, please. So over the past 5 years, people's expectations of brands have grown more personal, more emotional, and more expansive. They want brands that make them feel good, give them hope, help them contribute to something bigger, teach them something, give them a new skill, and connect that to others. So in short, they want brands that do, brands that respond with agility, empathy, and intention, not just to culture, but to the lives and needs of the people they serve. And that's really what it means to be an active brand today. Next slide, please. And a huge part of what makes a brand active isn't just what it says, it's what it's expected to do based on the space it plays within their category. And we've actually found that expectation shifts fairly significantly by industry. In health and pharma, for example, people expect education and hope. In food and beverage, it's about making people feel good and creating that connection. In financial services, it's about teaching and empowering. So your role as an active brand isn't generic at all. It's actually quite contextual. The expectations are already set by the category, and really the job is just to live up to them. Next slide, please. Once you know your role, who delivers the information matters just as much as what's said, because people ultimately trust people. 84% trust family and friends, 80% trust customers like themselves, and we see that that actually drops pretty significantly for CEOs and influencers. So when you activate your message, really think less about broadcasting it and more about circulating it through the voices that people already trust and through culture. These voices are the ones that we've invested in as a firm with our labs, as Jackie mentioned, with our longevity lab and our Gen Z lab as well, as brands are really driving the power of influence in addition to the creators that brands utilize. And as a brand, you want to help others to speak on your behalf when you're not in the room to speak for yourself. Next slide, please. And we can't talk about where to show up without talking about AI. We were actually pretty astounded to see that 55% of people globally are now already using generative AI, and that number climbs even higher among Gen Z and millennials. But what's more important is how they're using it. A full 9 in 10, 91% say that they turn to AI platforms for shopping. Man, that has been a hugely fast growth period. And that means that product discovery, comparisons, reviews, and recommendations are increasingly happening in a search environment where brands don't buy placement, they actually earn it. So we actually feel like this is a huge opportunity. We feel like we're entering the golden era of earned. What shows up in AI is shaped by reputation, relevance, credibility, and clarity. To say it shortly, it's really fueled by earned. For media and PR leaders, this is a defining opportunity to architect how brands are found, not just how they're seen. Because in the AI shelf, you're not discoverable, you're not even considered. Next slide, please. And finally, the strongest signal of an active brand is how it shows up in experience. 70% say their own experience influences their opinion of a brand. 59% say it's the experience of others. Compare that with 50% who say they're influenced by what a brand says in its own advertising. So we really see this as a wake-up call. Your greatest brand impact doesn't come from ads or commercials. It comes from what people live and what they share. You build trust not by telling people what you are, but by letting them feel it and talk about it themselves. Next slide, please. So this is a fun slide, just a bit of an articulation of everything that we found today, because brands are really facing the tension of walking a bit of a tightrope. There's no safety net. Brands have to do two things at once: do good in the world and make people feel good in their lives. Lean too far into the societal issues and you risk alienating the very people you're trying to reach. It can feel performative, opportunistic, and in the worst of cases, even polarizing. But lean too far into just making people feel good and you risk losing your edge. You become just another nice product. You disappear into the noise. Brands aren't just fighting for attention, they're fighting for meaning. Consumers don't just want to be seen, they want to feel like they're understood. And the brands that will win are the ones that will walk that line with intention, bringing clarity, emotion, and action together in a way that feels both relevant and real. So Richard, over to you to close us out.
So for the last decade, purpose has driven marketing, and it's largely been about a better world. What we're telling you today is we see a major shift of tectonic plates, that purpose has become personal. It has to talk to my personal needs because fears are so heightened. Job loss, inflation, geopolitics, lack of belief in quality information. Second, that brands are filling the trust void, that brands, in fact, are the most trusted. They're ahead of any institution. But what you see is it's paired with my employer at the top. What it means is that trust is local, that I want to control my relationships. I feel generally out of control. My brand purchases help me be in control, also stand for what I believe in. At the same time, my employer, I can work there or not work there. Third, silence is not safety. A lot of CMOs, when there were changes in politics, said, oh, well, I'll stick my head down and we'll just carry on. Mistake. You take yourself out of any relevance. You need to realize that you're competing with store brands and domestic brands. You can't be commoditized. At the same time, people will define you if you don't define yourself. Rule number one of comms. Fourth, we've got to have active brands. You've got to meet the consumer where he or she is. What that means is be active in culture, be active in the world. Use the idea of experience and speak up. Be part of culture. Okay, now Courtney's going to do a panel and introduce a couple of panelists, and Jackie and I will also participate as the audience would like us. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Okay, I'd love to introduce two esteemed panelists to chat with us today. First, Nikki Haley, Senior Advisor, Edelman Public and Government Affairs. Welcome, Nikki. We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
And I'd also like to introduce Mariana Sanz, who is the CEO of our Latin America offices at Edelman. Nice to have you, Mariana.
Hello, everyone.
Great. All right, I'm going to kick us off, Nikki, with a question over to you. I was really struck in Cannes by how you spoke about this sense of don't judge me, just get me. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about how brands show up in a way that feels emotionally supportive, but not overly political or patronizing.
Well, I think that first of all, I think that the trust barometer shows a lot because what people want is they want a good quality product at a good price and they want to know your company's taking care of its people. But what does that mean? They actually want a closer relationship with you. And people get close to those who are transparent because when you're transparent, they feel like they can trust you, where they actually feel like they're spending time to get to know you. So there's putting thought into everything that's happening. And that is not political at all. You know, none of the political terminology, none of the things that have divided people. We've seen across the world where there's been divisions in every country. They don't want that. They want to feel like they're a part of something. They want to feel patriotic and feel good about their country. They want to feel good about how they spend their money, but they want to be told the truth. So the transparency side is really important. And that means if you are in food and beverage or any of those things, being transparent about the ingredients is only going to become more and more of an issue. If you are, selling something, showing that you are a family brand, that it's healthy, that it's safe, that it's, talks to what families care about, but also knowing that, the product is worth it. That they don't mind companies making money as long as you're honest about it. So, for example, if there is a tariff situation right now, they don't want to hear about the tariffs. They just want to know that the business climate has changed. And, there's ways you can say our prices are going up because the business climate has changed. People are smart. They don't need you to talk politically to them. They just need you to be honest and transparent with them. That's where the trust comes in.
That's great. So this idea of make me feel good is a key remit of what purpose means today for brands. So Jackie, I'll actually toss this next question over to you. You talked a little bit about that brands need to be in my world, not just, solving the problems of the world. So As we sort of think about this premise, the shift in purpose, what's one under-leveraged channel or tactic to meet people in a very personal ways, whether that's local voices, channels, influencers, or AI?
Yeah, I mean, I think the finding that's been so interesting, given who Edelman is that earned first content is driving discoverability on AI, and that's why we have the slide in the deck that talks about the golden era of earned, because generative platforms basically prioritize relevance and engagement, not the ad dollars. And so brands that show up in organic conversations, reviews, editorial driven articles, credible content are more likely to surface. And in fact, someone gave us a data point while we were in Cannes at the Lions just the other week that 90% is editorial or Reddit on AI sourcing. So obviously that's a whole different slant on how you market your products, how you market your stories, how you market your brands, where you put your dollars and your effort behind, and a big opportunity to be much more constructive with where you are in earned. And we also see that brands win when they basically kind of localize the things that are universal. In our own world of Dove Real Beauty, we've got a myriad of campaigns for Dove that really do sort of trap into those cultural moments, but those cultural moments are all very deeply personal to the consumer, to the woman that they are targeting. We see eBay's Endless Runway, which won awards this year, make a really big stand for sustainability in the high fashion world. And that fashion resale of pre-loved garments becomes a sustainable platform, but very personal, because it's to the consumer who's actually buying the pre-loved garments on eBay and talking very specifically to what that consumer wants. And so I think it's really important that we really understand how to bring these stories into the deeply personal, and that really plays very much of being in my world, from the we to the me. And then finally, of course, we've got influencers and creators, local spokespeople, that we see engagement being more important than the numbers. And so the notion of going from macro to micro marketing across the board and understanding the power and importance of being very engaged to deeper engagement to less people, but having many more of those micro communities, that's the way to go, much more than the macro.
I mean, Courtney, you have to take a look at under the desk news on TikTok, where a guy is actually doing the news from under a desk. And Vivian too is doing hers from a car. I mean, you know, this whole idea of being genuine by having unusual sets and having short form, and you know, it's a parallel universe to the one that I grew up in. But that's good. It's important.
I wanted to talk a little bit about nationalism, Richard. I know that that's something that you mentioned as well. So Mariana and Richard, wondering if maybe you guys can tag team this one. How should global brands really navigate this growing nationalism and preference for local brands while still showing up with sort of that consistency globally?
Senora.
Gracias, Richard. So in the report, we see that people trust domestic brands more than foreign ones in most markets. So winning trust now means acting authentically as a local brand. We need to understand what's happening, what's relevant culturally in these markets, and not just showing up like a global brand. I love when we say in Edelman that cultural fluency beats corporate uniformity. Right now, people really need to feel the brands understanding them. In Latin America, with all the trade wars happening around, we've seen a lot of brands really explaining about their experience, about the history of these brands in these markets, about the amount of people working with them, how they're relating to the community, and they're using wit and even humor to explain this, really relating to what matters in these markets. We saw a campaign of a beer salting its beer with Gulf of Mexico salt. So it's not politicizing, it's not like adding up to the conflict, it's just trying to relate to what really matters in this market. So I think that brands really need to understand that this is key in this moment.
So two other quick things. One, and this is straight from Nikki's playbook, emphasize your local supply chain. For example, with PepsiCo in Mexico, growing their corn locally for Doritos and helping local farmers to improve their incomes. Secondly, I think that PepsiCo Mexico is how the company ought to be known, as opposed to just PepsiCo. It needs to be as local as possible with a local face and doing things that are oriented to education or anything else that's helping the people. It needs to be a full cycle so that you don't leave room for domestic competitors to say that I'm more local than you are. Multi-local is the new word, not multinational.
Multi-local, straight from under the desk. You heard it here. Nikki, anything else you'd add to that on nationalism?
The biggest thing I'll say right now that products should do is this is a time to lean in and educate. This is a time to brag about all that you do as a company within that country for the people, with the product, everything. People trust who educates them. So educate them on everything, whether it's the transparency of what's in your product, whether how it's, grown or made in the country, whether it's how many people it serves through a foundation or something else. Educate the consumer. They want to know you. So teach them something, and teach them something that's going to make them feel good about you, something that they didn't know about your company that you think that's worthy to know. Brag about yourself and be transparent while you do it.
I love that. Be brag worthy. I want to just remind everyone, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. We can certainly get to those. We'll have time at the end to address. So I love that advice, Nikki. And actually, to that end, Jackie, I'd love to take this next one over to you. It's a question we actually get quite often, which is around culture. How do you remain culturally fluent without overstepping your bounds?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about how important brands and culture are together. And I would say that where we're at now is consumers, especially the Gen Zers, but consumers generally are super smart about if you're trying to just be exploitative about culture. And so we really want to be talking about cultural literacy rather than just out and out opportunism. If you reflect culture authentically rather than just trend chase, then 73% of consumers say that's going to build trust with them. So you really have to do your homework and understand the permission space. And we talk a lot about, well, what is the permission space? Where am I okay to go? It doesn't mean being safe, by the way. You can still be brave, you can still be creative, you can still be leading, but just understand what your brand is, what the values of your brand are, what the values of the brand, of the values of the consumers that you're trying to go to and the community that you're going to. And so that's important. It's also important to think about being relevant rather than reactive. Really understand, make sure you have the people around you to listen to you, to help you make it correctly positioned so it doesn't look tokenistic, it looks real, it looks understood, it looks like it belongs in the community. And something came up in our can conversation that I've stolen, which I just love, which is, if your brand went away today, what would your community miss? And I think that is a very good litmus test to understand what role you have, the brand and the community together.
And Courtney, also, if you have any issues, I thought Brian Nickel 10 days ago in Las Vegas, when he spoke to all the Starbucks store managers, was brilliant, because he said, you know what? I'm putting an assistant manager in every store. We're going to improve our service. We're going to make sure that nobody's overworked. We're going to make sure that our products are affordably priced. All these things that gave everybody like, yes, let's go.
That's amazing.
14,000 of them.
Well, I mean, that's the job, I think, is partly about rallying not just your consumers, but your employees as well. So to that end, Richard and Nikki, I'll actually toss this one over to you. You could tag team it. This report really underscored that purpose hasn't disappeared, but it has evolved. And we know that some of these big moralized issues alone don't land like they used to. So can you both talk a little bit about what it means today to really, you talked a little bit about being multi-local, but Richard, wondering if you could expand on that a little bit, and what does it mean to do good today and really reflect that personal nature to consumers and employees alike?
I think consumers don't want politics. I think they want to have a very strong sense that the brand is making their lives better. And so we do a program for Ajinomoto on MSG, and it was only acceptable in 10% of American households a few years ago. And now it's 60% acceptable because it's more healthy. It's better for me, is the point. It's not political. Take down my risk if I'm becoming older from getting high blood pressure, things like this. Similarly, Dove was so ahead of its time in understanding about female self-image, and only 2% of women thought that they were beautiful. That's a great campaign that's had legs because it serves the individual's need. Nikki?
I think what's important is you're having multiple conversations. You're going to have one conversation with your consumer, which is to educate and be transparent and make them feel like you're listening to them. You're going to have another conversation with your employees, which is, you know what? Our number one goal is not to offend anybody, not to divide anybody. We need 100% of the consumers. Let's go out and get them by really letting them know we hear them, we see them, but we're going to keep politics out of their world because they're done with it. And then I think you have to have a conversation with your executive team, which is political. You do have to manage the politics of what's happening. You do have to manage tariffs and different administrations and what's happening. Those strategy meetings happen in the executive side. They don't have to happen with the employee side or the consumer side. So it's three different conversations, and you have to have all three and do them well. And if you do them, all the groups that you want to feel it will feel it in the best way, and everybody, all the negative, will not be dealt with in front of your consumers or your employees. You'll be dealing with that in the boardroom, and that's where it should happen.
But I also think, Courtney, that brands should not walk away from having a strong sense of the opportunity of a diverse consumer base, especially in the United States. When you have, I don't know, of the top 10 cities, majority, minority, Chicago, et cetera, it's a massively growing population. Just make them feel as if you see them as if they're people who are diverse in ads and other communications, and that, they're seen as successful and striving and all of the good things that they want to identify with. Similarly, on sustainability, if it's core to the business proposition to make sure the products are more affordable, do it. Talk about it. But it doesn't have to be goo-goo world. It's better for business.
And they just don't want to be preached to. They just don't want to be told what to do or made to feel bad about anything. They want to feel like you're being honest with them and that you're giving them something to feel good about. Because I think right now, people want to be more inclusive. They want to feel good about their country. They want to help their neighbors, all of those things. And so anything that makes them feel that, they will gravitate to it.
I love this idea that action doesn't need to be these big outward grand gestures. Sometimes the action can happen internally and with your employees as well, which I think is something that all CMOs and brand managers need to heed for sure. So with that thinking in mind, Jackie, this next question is over to you. And I know it's something we've talked a lot about as we were pulling apart this data, the idea that silence equals complicity or that inaction equals complicity. And that's a pretty heavy burden for brands. So how do you sort of reconcile this pressure to speak with the consumer fatigue around politics that Nikki and Richard just sort of talked about?
Yeah, well, I think Nick and Richard have both touched on this very well, which is that the politics is not the way to go, but the values of the brand and the values of the business and the values of from either the employee point of view or from the consumer interaction with the brand is the way to go. And so you really have to lead with that pulse of understanding your values, understand what you count for. And if you can't speak to an actual issue, or if we're saying that actually the big global issues from the we to the me are the way to go, then show up very specifically in the world that is your employees' world. Show up in your community, show up with the product, giving what the product should be giving to the consumer at a fair price with a good quality. And this is really going to the very, very bones of what a brand should do, to Nikki's point, and what a brand should stand for. And really, for the active brand phrase that we're using, we want action to speak for you. So this can't be empty action. You have to actually stand up, make a difference, and show where you are making a difference. But that difference is deeply personal, deeply community, deeply local, and deeply relevant to the values of the brand and the company.
That's amazing. There was a piece of data that I know that we were talking a bit about, which is that most people today are not sort of predisposed to buying new. They're actually reselling through the eBays, through the Amazon marketplaces, through their Pinterest communities. So give me the skill to be able to do that. So I think that touches on exactly what you're talking about, Jackie. Okay, so I'm going to actually stay with you, Jackie and Richard, to close us out with one last question. And I'll remind everybody that if you have questions as well, please pop them in the live streaming chat. We'll take them right after this. Jackie, you've been very passionate about this idea that we are living in the golden era of earned, and that is because of the growing AI usage and how it's being used for shopping. I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit more about that and what that means for brands today. And then Richard, anything else you'd have to add as well?
I mean, for me, as a jumped up publicist, which is how I started in this industry, it's an absolutely amazing opportunity to see that the earned storytelling is actually going to be more and more effective in search, and that if we don't have the stories appearing, then the search in AI won't find them, and we just won't show up in the same way. And so we have to fuel the AI engine with earned content, and that is a fantastic opportunity, but it's also a bit of a challenge if we're in a sort of traditional marketing model of the sort of advertising drive being the arrowhead, because basically we know that the more your brand shows up in organic conversations, or creator videos, customer reviews, news coverage, editorial features, reporting on experiential events, the more it's surfaced in LLM powered search. And so that's a fantastic opportunity as long as you skew your marketing activity that way, and it's all to play for. So I think that these things can be easily done. It's nuance, it's storytelling, and it's editorial, and that should be the arrowhead of AI optimization.
So, Courtney, my last comment is to do with misinformation. And as an example, spirits consumption in the US is down 5% this year. It was down 3% last year, a lot to do with no safe levels, which has been put out by the antis and not in any way contradicted. And it becomes part of the talk track. And I think brands need to stand up for themselves and recognize that in a post-COVID world, expertise has been diminished, that the people close to you are the best sources of information, your pharmacist, your pastor, your internist, and that the battle has to be both an air game and a ground game, meaning you can have experts, but they don't appeal to many people. So you have to have the ground game and talk to local sources and be consistent about it, and be in social media and say, that's not true. This is the truth. Here's another side. Here's white papers. So in a way, the idea that marketing is separate from corporate affairs is a dated idea. We just have to make sure that the two pieces work together.
That's right, sort of the intersection between brand reputation and promotion. I think it's such an important point. So thank you all for that. We are starting to get some audience questions flowing in, so I will pivot to that now. Mariana, I'm actually going to toss this one to you. It really is something that sits between heritage and cultural fluency. Is there a difference between new companies and longstanding companies when it comes to brand trust?
I think that all companies can work with the history and the experience that they have in the culture, in what is relevant to the markets. But I also see new companies having a very wide understanding of culture and being able to really embrace it and express themselves in a very local and authentic way. So I don't think that it's a matter of time. It's a matter of how you understand culture and then behave. It's about not what you say, but it's what you do in these markets to become culturally relevant and identify what's in that conversation that Richard was talking about, right? It's really be able to listen what's relevant out there and then work with that. So I don't think that it's a matter of an age of a company.
More their history and what they have, their proven track record, whether that's a long track record or a short one. Okay, great. We have another one. I'm actually going to toss this to the full group here. How big of a role do the leaders associated with the brand need to be playing in executing the brand strategy? And is it possible today to scale a brand without having visible and active C-levels? So Richard and Nikki, maybe do you want to start with that?
So I'll start. Look, a lot of the newer brands come from celebrities. They come from entrepreneurs. And in fact, those are the faces in the marketplace. So if you're an established multinational brand and you do the tried and true of, oh, I've paid my celebrity more, that, that's not credible. It has to be people's own experiences, this whole idea of horizontal trust or local trust. And so anyway, Nikki, to you.
I think that CEOs need to be very involved. I think people want to know who is leading the company. I think people want to know what they think, how they feel, not about politics, not about those things, but about the brand, why the brand is important, why they care so deeply about their workers, why they want to make sure that everybody has healthy X, Y, or Z, or why they want what they want to do with their brand to grow it and help in this evolving world. I think it's so important. And a CEO is so valuable to get out there if they're willing to and just talk about their product and their brand and why it's important in every person's life. I think that's an amazing thing. I always tune in a little bit more when I can hear a CEO talk about something that he does. And it gives you a connection with the consumer that otherwise the consumer doesn't have. A consumer, if they don't know who the CEO is, they just see somebody in a boardroom, that they don't know. If they have a personality and a person and they see them, there is a connection there. So I think where CEOs are willing to kind of put themselves out there a bit, it's a good thing. And I know this is actually a challenging time where CEOs are nervous about people knowing who they are. And there have been some, fears with some threats against CEOs. It is a risk, but I also think that, you have to weigh it. How much do you want your consumer to know the company? If the consumer knows the CEO, they feel like they know you better. And I think that they should lean in. I actually think this is a really fun opportunity and time for companies to be flexible, to be creative, to really lean in, to be more personality driven, all of those things. There's a lot of fun that you can do with your company in a way, in a very stressful world that will actually make consumers want to know you more. And I think that Edelman's perfectly aligned to get you ready to do that. And it's a good time to do that.
I mean, even if it's just you're a house of brands, you have to establish as the CEO what the values are, how you make employees, feel good at work, et cetera. So just have a roof of the house and then let your brands do their work.
Yes.
Great. Mariana, I'm going to toss this next one to you. And Richard, certainly if you have anything else to add, I know it's one thing that you presented, but this year we actually saw that trust is now equal to value and quality as sort of a leading indicator of purchase. But we were getting a question here that so many leaders today are still really measured on the business outcomes like revenue and that sort of thing versus trust. So how do you reconcile that tension?
Well, let's see this report. This report shows us that trust is becoming a big part in the purchasing decisions of people. And in a world, again, that is so complex and where we are so pressured by outside conflicts, I think that brands who understand that will start measuring their own people and their own executives with a different kind of KPIs that really considers trust and the reputation that they're building in the markets. And I want to return to Haley's point on fun. I think that COVID showed us that when CEOs humanize themselves and are closer to the people, when we see the human behind, that really helps. And that really helps us develop a human relationship with these brands. And I think that this matters, and it will be clear that this will matter even more in terms of the purchase decisions in consumers.
If you're a big multinational brand and you're competing in a developing market against a domestic player, almost inevitably the domestic player will be cheaper and will, have quality that's arguably within distance, But the Z-axis, the thing that people have to now fight on is also there's an X-axis, a Y-axis, and a Z-axis is trust. And the domestic player will be more trusted than you unless you do something affirmative that shows that you are in fact a multi-local and that you care about having local actors or in your ads, or that you are talking with local influencers, or that your employees are deeply well paid, and that you're helping local farmers with supply chain. So that entire picture, you have a potential advantage or a disadvantage. If you don't do something, you'll be disadvantaged.
Great. On that note, Jackie, this next question I'll toss over to you, and others can pop in as well. What do people expect from brands in terms of environmental issues, specifically on the climate crisis and waste management? Do they feel these issues have less impact on their quality of life, or did your research reveal something different?
Yeah, we found that there was, I think I said in the slide, there wasn't one size fits all for the data on this. So we said in one of the slides that nuance is a kind of superpower for brands. You do have to understand the nuance of your own community and your own brand in these spaces, but we do find that all of these issues score to varying degrees depending on the community across the world, depending on the country, depending on the situation. For example, we know that with Gen Z, there's much more emphasis on stepping up and helping save the planet in all of the areas that might mean. And therefore, if you're a Gen Z orientated brand, you're going to be asked many more questions about your role in environmental issues than if you're not a Gen Z orientated brand. So there's not a one size fits all for that answer, but there is an absolute need to understand and acknowledge what your own audience wants in that space and what your brand role has the permission to play in that space. If it looks tokenistic, or it looks like you're just badging some kind of environmental support, that's not going to help your brand. If it's actually woven into the tapestry of how your brand shows up and what your consumer is having in a relationship with your brand, then obviously that's something that we can see is to be encouraged. And we do hear from consumers that they want brands, this phrase, they want brands to use their superpower of reach and their superpower of budget to help educate and to help support if those societal needs are in keeping with how the brand shows up.
But we do have to acknowledge, Courtney,
too is,
go, Nikki.
What I do think is important is whether you're on the left of politics or the right of politics or anywhere in between, Everybody wants a world that has clean air, clean water, is in some way making the world better. The difference is the terminology you use in saying it. For example, in the US, you don't want to say climate change, you don't want to say sustainability, but when you say, I want my family to have clean water and clean air, 100% of people are going to be with you. When you say, I want to know that we're leaving the world in a better place for future generations to come, everybody's going to be there for you. So you can absolutely brag on what you're doing. It's the terminology. Is anything that's ever been used politically, that's what you don't want to say. But everybody, regardless of the political spectrum, they all want the same things. They just don't want to be preached to or lectured to and what that means.
That's great. Richard, I'm going to toss this next question over to you. I know it's something that you've been quite passionate about as we've been talking. What do people expect from brands in terms of, I'm sorry, this one. In the context of AI-driven search platforms, do you foresee sooner or later a shift towards these platforms becoming ad-driven or to increase profitability, to justify the huge expectations and valuations, where companies that pay the most are prioritized in search results, potentially diminishing the value of earned media?
It's possible, but the lines at the moment, traditional search has, 85%, and the Gen AI LLM has 15%. By 2028, it's supposed to be 30%. I think the Gen AI products are going to emphasize vox populi and quality as opposed to, paid search results. So I think that there's a runway here for PR folks. But in particular, you don't just get earned, you get earned by doing something, because you have to make news. So it's incumbent on brands to see that this is a rising force in purchase, and that therefore you need not just to reallocate your budgets, of course, to us, but the bigger proposition is you have to actually fix problems and be relevant in society.
And Courtney, there's two conversations again that you have to have there. When it comes to AI, you should absolutely, if you don't already have a strategy, a PR plan, and moving in what AI is going to do in your business from a advertising, but also from an operations standpoint, you will fall behind. You should be having those conversations right now. The second conversation is you need to have that AI conversation with your employees. Let them know what their job is going to look like a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now. Let them know how they can be better and grow with the company and AI, and give them the tools to do it. That's the thing, is this has to be a team effort of taking your employees along with you. If there are classes they need to learn, if there are other things they need to do, they should be told that. A lot of times right now, employees have no idea what AI means to them outside of it's a scary thing. Let them know it's actually going to make their jobs more efficient. It's actually going to make them more productive. And if they really want to be good and use AI to an advantage, this is the class you can take to get better at your job. I think those are very, very important going forward.
Amazing. Okay, great. Well, we are about at time. We've gotten some really great questions. And just to remind everybody that we're willing to set up separate one-on-one time if you have specific questions. So Richard, I'll turn it over to you to close this out.
I'm so proud of this research. I think that it's made a real contribution to marketing because we've identified a significant change from we to me. The idea that people are so upset and destabilized by the events of the last 5 years that brands are their lifebuoy and their partner in the future, and the necessity of optimism and calming people down, and that they can in some way control their relationship with brands. That's what it's about. And they have to be listened to, and that they want to feel partners in a better future for their families. So I deeply appreciate everything our trust team does, and all our clients who've tuned in. And have a great summer, and we'll see you in the fall with more great research. Thank you.